Hi, ladies. I thought I might kind of summarize some of the themes we had in discussion number one. And at the end, I'll kind of give you a summary of how everyone did on the discussions, make some suggestions, and then I'll share my learning style inventory too. So a couple of themes that I noticed from our discussion was you guys really want an instructor to be involved and to have expertise. Katie felt that a teacher has a moral and ethical obligation to teach. Not sure I really agree with that, but I would encourage you not to forget that you feel this way. And all of you said that you want teachers to have expertise. And so remember that you feel that way so that you make sure you demonstrate that to your students. So that's partly why I'm doing the video, is so hopefully you can kind of put a name with a face and kind of see what my expertise is, which I'll kind of share at the end. Several of you mentioned that you want professors to work harder. I think meaning more that you want professors to be involved in the course and to know that they're involved. A couple of people mentioned, actually a lot of you mentioned, working on areas where you scored low and then revisiting the assessments on a regular basis. I think that is a great idea. And I loved seeing your conversation back and forth about what you learned doing these assessments. And then you also mentioned having students do their own assessments, which again, I think is a great idea at the beginning of courses. Molly mentioned that new students really struggle with nursing school, and that's something I absolutely have noticed as I've taught over the years, is how different nursing school is than just their initial college courses, and how they really struggle with trying to study for a test where you have more than one answer. So I'll share some things I've done with that with students in the future, and maybe link you to my website that has some videos on that if you're interested. And a lot of that is based on learning style and what I've learned working with students that have struggled over the years. So I'll be happy to post that if that's something you guys would find interesting. Another thing that I thought of as you all had that discussion is, I think about what I disliked as a student, and I just finished my doctorate not too long ago. So one thing I disliked in my master's program and in my doctorate, because they were both online programs, was discussions. So I feel your pain if you don't like discussions. That's why I'm trying to add a little bit of interest here and make you realize that I do read them and do pay attention, because I always felt like my instructors weren't actually involved in the discussion. It was just busy work, which it is to a degree. We do have to show that you are doing an activity every week. And so trying to make that, again, applicable and worthwhile is a bit of a challenge. And so when we get to that online, how to do online learning, hopefully we can have some more discussions about other ideas for that, because I don't have great ideas, but maybe we'll discover some together. Another theme that I noticed is feeling that as a new educator, you might not be able to cover all the learning styles until you become an expert yourself in just education. And I would totally agree with that. And I would throw out a couple of things. At least try to do a variety of learning activities. And several people mentioned that. But I would also, just for food for thought, say, where does the student have some responsibility? Easy at the graduate level, because you have a lot of your own responsibility for your learning, but a little bit harder at the undergraduate level. And so, yes, I do think we need to work to people's styles. We need to address a variety of styles. But there is some responsibility for the students. So doing those learning assessments, having the students do a learning assessment, and giving them ways to work to their style is another way you can do this. So I really loved Corinne's statement where she said, and I've got this here, I believe effective teaching must also be balanced against the educator's preferences to an extent. I'm likely to be more confident and teach better using a mechanism that makes me comfortable. This balance needs to be constantly adjusted to avoid getting stuck in a single method that may not work in all teaching scenarios. I think that's a great perspective that we all can learn from. And then I also noticed that Sheila said there's more than one way to be a good teacher, and I think that's very true too. Let's see, I thought it was interesting that we all scored low in social reform on the TPI. I think some of that is just the nature of what we teach, which I think several people mentioned. I think it's also interesting we all score high somewhat in kinesthetic, and that I think relates to being a nurse. And I noticed that a lot in nursing students, and it's because that's how we enjoy learning and doing skills. We all mostly scored left brain instead of right brain. I think Sheila had right brain. I can't remember if anybody else did. And then I thought it was interesting we mostly scored lower in reflective. You would think it'd be more, not for me, but I would think as generally as nurses, we might score higher in reflective. So I thought that was interesting. Lastly, the last thing I noticed is several people mentioned other things to keep in mind besides learning styles. Very important. So Angie talked about age issues and tech and being careful when we use a lot of tech to think about generation. A lot of you mentioned age and generational differences, which is always important to pay attention to and difficult to deal with. So again, giving lots of instructions, making sure you give details is helpful for that. Corinne mentioned gender differences and thinking about that. I thought that was interesting. Hadn't thought about that before. And then clinical expertise. And if they're at multiple levels, especially for those of you that are teaching in the hospital setting, kind of thinking about who your audience is, which certainly is very helpful. And then Molly mentioned cultural diversity. Again, also important and another thing that's kind of hard to do. A couple of things I don't want us to forget. Angie, you mentioned that new orientation model of two peers instead of just a peer and a mentor, or an orientee and a mentor. Keep remembering that as we move forward and do clinical discussion, because I think that'd be a really interesting topic to look a little bit closer at. And then also, I think, Angie, you mentioned that online brings its own challenges, and that's absolutely true. And again, something we're going to spend a whole week on coming up. So just a couple of quick discussion suggestions for all of you. You all did great, substantial initial posts. I like how you did that. And so that all looked good to me. In the replies, be sure that you have some substance. A couple of you have pretty limited replies and the same references over and over. So be careful that you're paying attention to that. I mean, this week, everybody will get full points. Just pay attention to that. Also, it's fine to ask questions. I like that you do that, but also offer some answers too, perhaps, because a lot of you asked a lot of questions of people, but didn't necessarily offer some answers. But I do like how you replied. So be sure that you follow your initial thread and you reply back when a question is asked. You don't have to do every single thing. I don't mean that you need to watch it every second and reply immediately. But a couple of people did not reply at all back to the people who replied to them. So I don't expect you to reply to everybody. But if there's a question asked and there needs to be a discussion, please finish that discussion out. So one more thing that I wanted to just quickly bring up and that we can discuss more in the future, and then I'll tell you my learning style. Erin mentioned wondering whether having little time to prepare for a course will make a difference in how well you teach and whether you touch different learning styles very well. And I think that's really interesting. And so I'll kind of bring up what happened to me this semester, not as an excuse, but for something for you to think about, because you're going to experience this too moving forward. So I got this course, about a month before school started, but unfortunately they didn't get me onboarded until school actually started. So about the day it started. So they gave me a syllabus, which was very vague, and then gave me more information on the day the course started. To add to that, I moved and didn't have any internet access for 4 weeks. Cellular access, so all of those things makes it very hard. I had to wait for books to be sent to me. I don't know Blackboard. I've worked on lots of systems, but not on Blackboard. So just so you don't feel uncomfortable with my expertise, I've taught for over 10 years. I have a master's in nursing education. I've been an administrator in education. So hopefully you can feel comfortable with my background. But when you pick up a new course, it takes a little bit of time to get used to that. Even when they give you a course that was already in place with an expert instructor and give you all that information, you could choose to just do it like it is. Pick it up, do every assignment they had, do it exactly like it is, and make it work. But you could also choose, and I would submit to you that you should choose to make sure that you read the assignments, that you know what's going on, that you review all of that. Now, the problem with getting a course late, and this is going to happen to you a lot if you're in education, whether it's in the hospital or whether it's at a university, is you have to start with something. And so, again, I think, how would I want as a student? I would want to see the calendar. I would want to know what assignments I'm going to do. So those are the things that I focused on at the very beginning for you, but then I've had to kind of fill in the gaps as I go. So we'll discuss this more in the future. I'll see if I can put this in a discussion somewhere so we can talk about what would you do? What would you have done differently? I have big, broad shoulders. You're not going to hurt my feelings at all. So feel free to ask me questions or to bring this up in discussion if you want to. Lastly, I'll tell you my assessment responses. So learning style, sensing I'm very, very high in sensing. And the rest, I'm very well balanced, like scored 1 or 2, but I scored 11 in sensing. On the VARC, the visual kinesthetic, I actually did not like that tool and I picked it. So sorry about that tool. See if I can find us something better. But I'm generally kind of a visual and kinesthetic. I am not an oral at all. And then Kolb's, I scored 57% for theorist and 23% for pragmatist. Theorist, I'm like you guys. I hate theory, and so I couldn't believe I scored that until I realized what that was, just like you guys did. I'm very left-brained. And then on the TPI, I scored in the 40s for apprenticeship and development, 38, so almost in the 40s for transmission, and then low 28 for nurturing and 23 for social reform. So I hope that tells you a little bit about myself. And if you have questions, let me know. Bye.